Welcome to chapter 14, which is, and I have to give a proactive apology in this case, the most grammatically overloaded chapter of the textbook. If we were starting from new and creating this textbook, all the grammar that we cover in this chapter, I would spread it out over several chapters, but it's too late now. We've been working with this model for this skeleton of a textbook so long. So yeah, this is the one chapter where you have a whole lot of grammar to learn, but the good news is no other chapter after this is going to be this heavy grammatically. But we start with some lighter stuff before we get to the tricky stuff. And here we go. We start with temporal adverbs in sec. This is a not fully productive ending, but an ending that is used in enough words that it's good to know this one. That basically it forms adverbs meaning since. You attach it to a temporal adverb and then you have another adverb meaning since then. Kunam when, kunam sec, since when. Tengeche yesterday, tengech sec, since yesterday. Yeah, and since it's not fully productive, it also doesn't have to be fully regular. Like the A of tengeche can just disappear here, or even worse, if we have imashte last year, imash sec, even the T disappears here simply. We do have the postposition gotsek that is employing this suffix, as you can see. That can be used productively. If you want to say like since Sunday or whatnot, you can have that ushanya gotsek or something like that. This is the productive thing to use, the thing that you can use with any stem. We are looking at some verbal derivational suffixes at this point, like the suffixes that you attach to verbal stems to form new verbal stems. We have a first conjugation derivational suffix. When I say that derivational suffixes, verbal derivational suffixes have a conjugation class, that means that all verbs formed with this suffix belong to this conjugation class. But first we have alt, a first conjugation suffix that is basically valency decreasing. We attach it to a verbal stem and it decreases the valency of the verb by one. It makes one fewer person involved. So it can turn a transitive verb like kildash, to prepare, into, to connect, into an intransitive, into kildatash, to be connected, into sort of a passive reading. It can be reflexive, yamdalash, to prepare, yamdalaltash, to prepare oneself, to get oneself ready without an accusative object now. In some cases, it's like peterash is to close something transitively, peteraltash is to close intransitively, and you don't have to mark who closes it or the such. We also have impersonal clauses. We'll get back to this chapter, and I believe to this suffix in chapter 21, because there's quite a bit to say about it, but for now, just so you meet it here, you see some usage examples. If you want to see the discussion on it, you can go to the long form video. Alt in the second conjugation, this is a bit more, I should note that this alt is completely productive. You can attach it to any verbal stem. Second conjugation alt is a bit less productive, but still quite widely used, and it has a momentary reading, to do something for a little while. Kanash is to rest. Kanaltash is to have a short rest. Vuchash is to wait. Vuchaltash is to wait a little. Like, so if you're telling somebody to hang on, like you're trying to talk to me and I'm in the middle of doing something, I'm in the middle of like finishing off an email, and I'm saying, hey, wait a moment. I'm not telling you to go sit in the waiting room and wait for 2 hours. I'm telling you just to wait for the 10 seconds it takes me to finish this email. I would say more than vuchalte, hang on for a second there. Okay, and then we have ed, used to form second conjugation verbs, and this is frequentative, doing something repeatedly. Puash is to give, puedash is to give repeatedly, but also just to hand out, to give something to several people. Okay, participles, this is where the first big topic of this chapter. So participles are non-finite verbal forms that are primarily used as adjectives. If this is really primarily the case in Mari, it could be up to, with some of these participles, could be up to debate, but they definitely have this usage too. And we have got the active participle in she. You might already know it from like tunik sho, the teacher. Literally, it's just the teaching one. So yeah, and We have sh attached to the verbal stem. At this point, you know what that means. Stem simplification. About its usage. This is if you are coming from Baltic Finnic languages, you might be expecting there to be a distinction between past and perfect active participle. There is no such thing. There is no time dimension to this participle in Maori. The reading, if it's present or past of the active participle, it depends on context. So for example, if we have a tale of two fishes, one fish that is having a good day and one that is not, we on the left have an ilshekol, a living fish, and on the right we have a kolashokol, a fish that has died. And it's just, these are both the active participles of to live and to dead and of to die. And from context, it is clear which one is, that in one case we have a present reading and in one case we have a past reading. Yeah, the usage, it can be an attribute, it can be a predicative, and it can also be, so we can have like a reading child, we can have somebody who is a big reader who does a lot of reading, and we can also just use these passive participles by conversion, these active participles by conversions as nouns to have a teacher, a pupil, or a reader. Yeah. Then we have the passive participle with me, mo, me. Formation is exactly the same as the active participle, just we have an M instead of a sh. We have the same dimension that the same thing that we had with the active participle, that there's no embedded time dimension here. We do have, though, there's some stuff to be said about what range of constituents can really be relativized with this passive participle. And it's not just direct objects. It can also be like the place where something happens. So you can have like Oxarkieme kvartier, the apartment where the money is lying or so. Which if you watched the long form video, you can see me discussing Ksenia Chagall's work on this topic. Of course, you can also just find Ksenia Chagall's dissertation and read about this yourself. So, but the gist of it is that it's not just used in context that you would understand as passive coming from a Western European understanding. It can also relativize indirect objects and obliques. Okay. It also can be used as an attribute. Nalme pelek, the present, which has been, was bought. It can be a predicative that, like I can see, it was written about Ivuk in the newspaper, something like that. And here too, we can have substantivized versions like Palame, known, can also be a known person, so an acquaintance. Yarateme, a beloved, loved, can also be a beloved person, darling, or so. Yeah, and it is also used as a verbal noun. We'll get back to this because this is an important point, that it is then basically whenever you want to put a verb into a slot that is usually meant for a noun, so to say, and you need to put the verb into some form that it fits in a place where you otherwise would want a noun. So as a subject, as an object, or most commonly in combination with a postposition, then you need to have some kind of nominal form, and the nominal form that is used here is the passive participle. And in this situation, it completely loses any passive aspect of it. So it is, in this case, it is neither passive nor is it really a participle. It's just a verbal noun. And this is a common usage of this and of this form, which is why passive participle is a bit of a suboptimal name for it, but we've got to call things something. So just keep in mind that labels in linguistics are generally not perfect. You have to remember that even though I'm calling it passive participle, the usage of this form is not determined by this label. Okay, and the second big new topic in this chapter is the simple past tense 2. Luckily here, the formation is much easier than of the simple past tense 1, because this is a relatively new creature in Maori. So the formation of this is, we have the converb in N, remember that, followed by a personal ending in the for the positive forms, and in the negative forms followed by the negative forms of to be. And there we go. Well, this seems a bit strange. Maybe why do I have personal endings in the positive forms, but then to be negated in the negative forms? Well, historically, we had to be also in the positive form. that this was simply a periphrastic construction, so a construction of a syntactical construction where like a past tense is formed by the combination of a non-finite verbal form plus an auxiliary verb. Similarly as to how, like in English, I have gone is formed, where you have plus a participle. So, but with time, the positive forms were kind of reduced. Then from ulam, you eventually just had the ending am. From ulat, you eventually just had the ending at. Third person singular, where we don't use a couplet in the third person singular, so no ending there. And as a consequence of this, we also have these endings am, at, na, and such in both conjugation classes, because regardless of the conjugation class of the verb that you're using, to be is always the first conjugation verb. And thus you always have endings of the first conjugation. You can see the conjugation class in the formation of the converb in the core of this, because converbs are formed differently from first conjugation and second conjugation verbs. So having looked at this formation, can we form the paradigms of two verbs, ludash and vozash? You can pause the video and try it yourself, or you can look at the long form video and watch my students do this. Here we go. Okay. Talking about, though, I promised last week that I would discuss, or 2 weeks ago, that I would discuss the distinction between simple past tense 1, simple past tense 2. This is not necessarily a deterministic thing often, because sometimes you have a lot of situations where both are permissible. But if in a language two forms are permissible, does not mean that they are identical. There are different facets being communicated. So as a tendency, we can say first past tense is used in reference to things that have happened recently, that you immediately observed, whereas the second conjugation would be more things that are further back in the past and maybe you did not directly observe them. This is not an obligatory aspect that you didn't observe something. The first aspect often sometimes has a dimension of perfectivity and of rapidity, of just finishing an action completely, whereas the second conjugation has a tendency towards being more the description of a status. Here you have here some quotes from different reference materials that have been attributed to the first and the second conjugation. There are some situations where you definitely have to use one or the other. The first conjugation you definitely have to use if you just observe something and you are immediately expressing it. Like if somebody is explaining something to you that you've understood it, and they won't stop explaining, and you want to say, I got it, stop explaining, you would categorically more say, umlashim, I understood it, move on, stop explaining. But if you talk about how you, in school, 10 years ago when I was in school, I finally understood linear equations or whatever, then you would probably more use the second past tense form, umlanam. You definitely have to use the second conjugation, though, if you're talking about some experience, if you have ever had an experience or not. Have you ever smoked a cigarette? No, I have never smoked a cigarette. Categorically, second past tense, only thing that works there. And journalese, we say here, the second past tense is the standard form used in journalistic language. If there is no specific reason to use the first past tense, people use the second past tense. And this is important. If you don't know that you want to use the first past tense, don't use the second past tense. And here we have some data on the frequency of the different forms. You can watch the long form video to get an insight into this. And here we are also looking at what happens when forms of the past tense forms, if we have several past tense forms in one clause. If we have just past tense forms one, remember first past tense is associated with perfectivity. If we have several first past tense forms in juxtapositions, then usually we're talking about the serialization of events. I came, I saw, I conquered. If we have two past tense forms, second past tense forms, then we are usually talking about two simultaneous statuses. I was standing in line and reading a book. These are two things that are happening at the same time. And if I have both in this clause, like I was waiting, no, you were waiting and I came, then the second past tense is sort of the backdrop, and the first past tense is the punctual action that happens in front of the backdrop. So these are situations where then the choice really matters of the two past tense forms. Okay, words and word usage. What have we got here? Wähle and gena, both meaning only. Both of them have to be are postposed after their reference word. Telem wähle only in winter. Telem gena only in winter would also work. The difference between these two forms is it's dialectal, that you have gena more towards the east and wähle more towards the west. And in literary language, both are permissible. Türle, Türle, so we have Türle as like different, and Türle, Türle is all kinds of varying, diverse intensification by reduplication, again, as we had with Erken. Quick note about how some adjectives in Mari, like Poyan, rich, govern the dative, that if you want to say rich in something, you say to the forest, like to the forest rich, to say that the Mar, like sorry, I got it wrong. The Mari forests are rich in mushrooms. I say the Mari forests are rich to mushroom. It's just the government of Poyan rich. And we are going to meet some other adjectives that do this too, like tale, talented, talented at what the thing that you're talented at is in the dative. Üstembalne on the table, this harkens back to when we had Üstembacke onto the table. This goes back to üstel, ümbalne, üstel, table, ümbalne, on. So it's a melding of a noun and a postposition. And as a consequence of this, even though üstembalne is an adverb, actually, we can have possessive suffixes, which at first seems weird. Why possessive suffixes on an adverb? Well, because it goes back to a postposition, and postpositions can take possessive suffix. So üstembalnischt then means on their tables. Okay, to guy, such one, this kind of, here we are already seeing that we have two different demonstrative stems in Mari, t, this, and tu, that, and all kinds of different forms of this, all kinds of different pronominal forms can be formed from these stems. And the difference between this and that we have in t and tu is carried in all of these. Tischste here, tuschste there. Tenare, this much, tunare, that much, etc. You're going to meet a whole bunch of these still. And so to guy, this kind of, that kind of, your first introduction to this. Okay, Göra 10, a converb of to love, Göratash, lovingly. This is used often to denote how you do something. If you know German, this is like German gerne is used like this. So if I say like, I listen to the Mari radio lovingly, you're basically just saying, I like to listen to the Mari radio. Like in German say, ich höre gerne, blah, 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 blah. How are you doing it? You're enjoying doing it. Okay, and that gets us to the text. And here we have a little semi-historical text about the history of Mari cuisine through the ages. And yeah, you can see that putting a fish in your briefcase is for some crazy uncles that you might have a perfectly normal thing. That still gets us to the exercises. And finally, if you, after all that grammar, still have the energy for a song of the week, the song of the week this week is Pocztalionka, the mail woman, the letter carrier woman, which is a song that just details what the mail woman does, what her job entails, and why people respect her due to that. It is surprisingly straightforward and wholesome. Okay, so see you next week.